My daughter-in-law raised her wine glass and mocked me in front of the entire family. "Are you planning to rent forever?" She laughed. Everyone waited for me to be embarrassed until I quietly revealed that the house she bragged about every day actually belonged to me. The clinking of crystal glasses has always gotten on my nerves. That Sunday evening, my family was packed around my dark oak dining table, while my daughter-in-law, Chloe, poured herself another heavy splash of wine, with a gesture far too theatrical for my small dining room. My son Julian just stared down at his plate, completely unable or unwilling to check his wife's attitude. "Meredith," Chloe said loudly, lifting her glass and looking me dead in the eye. "When are you finally going to stop throwing money away on this apartment and buy something of your own? Or are you just planning on renting forever?" A low, uncomfortable chuckle rippled through the relatives at the table. Julian cleared his throat, but said absolutely nothing. I set my coffee cup down without making a sound. In that exact moment, I didn't feel a surge of anger, nor did I feel the urge to justify myself. All I felt was a deep, icy clarity. Chloe thought she held all the cards because she and Julian had moved into a beautifully renovated suburban home outside of Charlotte 6 months ago, a place she constantly flaunted on Instagram. She had absolutely no idea that the house didn't belong to the bank, despite what she told everyone. I looked around the table, taking in the expectant faces of my relatives, all waiting for me to squirm in embarrassment. Ever since my husband passed away 5 years ago, I've learned that silence is often more powerful than the loudest argument. I swallowed my last sip of coffee, smoothed out the tablecloth, and looked Chloe straight in the eyes. Sometimes, I said, my voice calm and deceptively soft, "Things aren't exactly how they look on paper." Chloe's smile froze for a fraction of a second, and the temperature in the room instantly shifted. The mockery had faded, but the real game was just getting started. The heavy silence following my comment didn't last long. Chloe quickly brushed it off with a loud, forced laugh and pivoted the conversation to her new backyard landscaping project. I stood up without a word to start clearing the dishes. Julian followed me into the kitchen to help, though he carefully avoided making eye contact. "She didn't mean it like that, Mom," he muttered under his breath, handing me a glass. I took it, slid it into the dishwasher, and didn't bother to reply. This wasn't the first time he had looked the way when his wife crossed the line. When my husband died, he left me with more than just this apartment. He left a substantial nest egg built from decades of smart investments in commercial real estate. I never used that money for luxury. Instead, 3 years ago, I set up a discreet property management LLC through a trusted local broker friend. When Julian and Chloe were hunting for a house and got turned down by traditional lenders, my LLC bought that suburban home anonymously and leased it to them under very generous terms. Chloe genuinely believed their landlord was a private investor based out of Atlanta. She had no clue that their $2,500 monthly rent check was routed directly into a secondary account that I fully controlled. Except, over the last 3 months, that money hadn't been arriving on time. Chloe had convinced Julian that a wealthy investor wouldn't miss a few weeks of rent using that money instead to finance a showroom's worth of high-end designer furniture. I walked back into the living room, sat down, and watched Chloe proudly swipe through photos of her new living room layout on her phone. I knew exactly what the next bank statement looked like. The next morning, I sat at my kitchen table, sipping my morning tea, reviewing the bank ledgers on my tablet. The automatic transfer from Julian and Chloe had failed yet again. This was now the 4th consecutive month without a rent payment. In total, they were short exactly $10,000. Rather than picking up the phone or losing my temper, I called the property manager running my LLC, Mr. Vance, who handled all tenant communications. "Mr. Vance," I said calmly, Please send the tenants at the Oak Ridge Drive property a standard late payment notice with a strict 2-week cure period. No exceptions. I didn't want to start an ugly legal war. I simply wanted the standard contractual rules enforced, the very rules Chloe so casually ignored. By that afternoon, Julian called me. His voice was laced with stress. "Mom, do you have a second? Chloe is losing her mind. The landlord is turning up the heat over the back rent." I played dumb. "Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that, Julian. But why don't you guys just bite it? You both have good jobs." Julian stammered through an excuse about unexpected car repairs and the financing on their new sectional. He didn't ask for money outright, but the subtext was loud and clear. He was hoping his mother would bail them out, just like I used to. "I'm sure you two will figure something out," I said, warm but unyielding, and hung up the phone. I could feel the weight of years of enabling sliding right off my shoulders. It was time to tighten the reins. No drama, just absolute consequence. 2 days later, Chloe called. Her voice had suddenly taken on a completely different, almost sycophantic tone. She invited me over to her place for coffee and cake. I knew precisely why. As I walked up the driveway of the home I legally owned, I noticed expensive new potted topiary trees flanking the front door. Inside, the house smelled of fresh-baked cinnamon rolls. Chloe proudly guided me through the living room like she was the queen of the castle. "It's just so wonderful to actually own your place, Meredith," she said, pouring my coffee into a porcelain cup. "You just feel so much more secure than you do in some rental." I simply smiled and took a sip. She didn't even attempt to bring up the rent until Julian walked through the door after work. He looked exhausted and pale as he dropped a crisp white envelope onto the kitchen island. It was the formal warning from Mr. Vance. Chloe glanced at it and let out a theatrical sigh. "This greedy landlord, as if he needs the money this exact second. Julian, you need to call him. Or Meredith, maybe you could give us a short-term bridge loan to clear this up." There it was. The real reason I was here. Chloe looked at me with a calculating, expectant gaze. She figured I would gladly drain my savings just to keep up appearances for my son. I set my cup down. "All of my funds are locked up in long-term investments, Chloe. I can't help you," I said evenly. Chloe's face hardened instantly. The fake warmth evaporated and her eyes narrowed. "Well, I guess we'll just have to see how we handle people who lack basic flexibility," she hissed. She had no idea she was looking right at him. At Quiet Revenge, we share stories about family, betrayal, resilience, loss, and the quiet strength that helps people move forward. While AI tools may assist with parts of our creative process, every story is carefully selected, reviewed, edited, and produced by our team, with great care and respect for our audience. Because our channel's monetization is currently limited, viewer support helps us continue creating these stories and maintaining the quality you expect. If our videos have ever kept you company, offered comfort, or given you something meaningful to reflect on, please consider supporting Quiet Revenge with the cost of a small cup of coffee. Patreon, https://www.patreon.com/quietrevenge. Family co-fi, https://ko-fi.com/the story. Family PayPal, https://www.paypal.com/paypalme/kanhuangmin. Thank you for being part of this community. The next several days passed quietly, at least on my end. Mr. Vance informed me that Chloe had tried to negotiate a flimsy payment plan, though she clearly had no intention of settling the full balance anytime soon. She still assumed this faceless Atlanta investor was far away and harmless. That weekend, The entire extended family gathered at a nice, uptown restaurant to celebrate my brother's milestone birthday. Chloe had gone all out dressed to the nines. She sat at the head of the long table, animatedly telling my sisters-in-law about her plans to host a massive summer pool party at the house. "We're actually looking into buying the property outright very soon," she lied seamlessly to the group. "Word is, the current owner is dealing with some liquidity issues, so we might be able to lowball him on the price." Julian stared down at his water glass, mortified. He knew it was a total fabrication, but he didn't dare correct her. I sat at the far end of the table, listening to every word while the relatives nodded along, thoroughly impressed. Then Chloe's eyes drifted back down to me. "Meredith, you're more than welcome to come, of course. We have plenty of room, unlike your place. It must be tough living so restricted at your age." The aunts gave me pitying looks. It was the exact same tone from a few weeks prior. This time, however, my tablet was tucked inside my purse. I felt no anger, only the cool necessity of letting reality crash the party. I stood up, pulled out the tablet, and walked slowly toward Chloe's end of the table. "Chloe," I said, my voice carrying clearly enough to cut through the restaurant chatter. "You talk a lot about ownership and big plans." I laid the tablet flat on the white tablecloth, right next to her wine glass. On the screen was the secure portal for my property management firm. The company logo was clearly visible, along with the Oak Ridge Drive address and the registered tenants Julian and Chloe. But the real draw was the bold, bright red text, "Delinquent 4 months. Balance due $10,000. Status notice to quit prepared." Chloe stared at the screen. The color drained from her face so fast, she looked ghost white. "What? What is this? Where did you get this?" she stammered, trying to slide the tablet away. But my brother and 2 of my sisters-in-law had already leaned in, reading the screen out loud. "You guys are 4 months behind on rent." "Chloe," my sister-in-law asked, completely blindsided. "And what is this management company anyway?" I scrolled down the page a bit further, right to the corporate structure and ownership disclosure. There, in clear, unmistakable black and white text, it read, "Sole owner and managing director, Meredith Evans." The entire table went so quiet, you could hear the ice melting in the water pitchers. Chloe looked up from the screen to me, her lips trembling. In that single moment, she realized the home she'd been bragging about and the greedy landlord she had been insulting were the exact same person the mother-in-law she assumed would rent forever. Julian buried his face in his hands. He hadn't known for sure, but deep down, he had suspected. Chloe tried desperately to scramble for her dignity. You spied on us. You only bought that place to control us." She practically shrieked, though her voice lacked any real power. The relatives just stared at her, the admiration completely replaced by a mix of shock and embarrassment. Not a single person spoke up to defend her. I calmly picked up my tablet and slid it back into my bag. "I gave you 2 an opportunity to live independently," I said, keeping my voice steady and firm. "I kept the rent below market value. But you didn't respect my property and you certainly didn't respect me." I turned on my heel, grabbed my coat, and walked out of the restaurant without looking back. Stepping out into the cool night air, I took a deep breath. It wasn't a rush of vindication, just the clean, quiet relief of someone who had drawn an absolute boundary. The very next morning, Mr. Vance officially served them with a formal notice to quit due to non-payment. The terms were standard and ironclad. They had 30 days to vacate. I knew they didn't have the cash to cure the debt. It was already tied up in their living room furniture. Chloe tried calling me 15 times that day. I didn't answer once. Julian sent a single text. "I'm so sorry, Mom." I replied, "I believe you, Julian, but the notice stands." 4 weeks later, the move-out deadline arrived. No miracle payment came through. Instead, Julian showed up at my apartment door entirely alone. He looked spent, with dark, heavy circles under his eyes. I let him in and poured him a mug of coffee, just like old times. Chloe packed her things and moved back in with her parents. He said quietly, staring into his mug. She says she can't bear the humiliation of living in a house you own. I simply nodded. And what are you going to do, Julian? He shrugged, looking defeated. I can't afford the place on my own. We're moving everything out today. There were no tears, no dramatic outbursts, and no accusations. Reality had completely deflated the superficial life Chloe had manufactured. I looked at my son and felt a pang of sympathy, but absolutely no regret. He had stood by and allowed his wife to disrespect his own mother for the sake of appearances. Now he had to carry the weight of that choice. Mr. Vance will handle the final walkthrough and key handover next week, I told him gently. I'm putting the house on the market. Real estate prices in that neighborhood are peaking right now. I'll be rolling the profits back into my investment portfolio. Julian looked at me as if he were seeing me clearly for the very first time. He had always viewed me as just his quiet, aging mother who faded into the background. Now he understood that beneath that silence lay total independence. He finished his coffee, stood up, and gave me a genuine hug. Thanks for being fair with me, Mom, he whispered before heading out. The sale of the suburban house went through without a single hitch. Because that particular neighborhood was highly sought after, Mr. Vance secured a cash buyer within a month. The proceeds cleared directly into my business account, a healthy profit margin that solidified my financial security for the rest of my life. Julian and Chloe's marriage didn't survive the fallout. Without the illusion of luxury to hold it together, it dissolved quietly into a divorce. I used a small portion of the capital to completely remodel my own downtown apartment. I didn't buy anything flashy, choosing instead to focus on lasting quality custom cabinetry for a kitchen I actually loved cooking in, and a massive solid oak bookshelf to line my living room wall. My relatives started calling me much more frequently over those next few weeks, suddenly incredibly polite and mindful of their tone. Nobody made snide remarks about my living situation or my age ever again. On a sunny Saturday afternoon, I sat out on my newly tiled balcony looking out over the city skyline. The breeze was crisp but comfortable. I didn't hold on to any lingering bitterness toward Chloe or the past. She had tried to teach me a lesson about status, and I had given her an answer in return, not with loud arguments, but with decisive action. My silence had never been a sign of weakness. It was simply the time I needed to position my pieces on the board. I was 66 years old, and I was calling the shots in my own life. A year later, the family gathered once again for a birthday. This time, the party was hosted right in my newly renovated apartment. Julian was there, looking noticeably happier and much more grounded. He was living in a comfortable, modest place closer to his office and seemed to have grown up significantly over the past year. He helped me out in the kitchen without any of the anxious, walking on eggshells energy he used to carry. As everyone sat down around the table, my brother looked around the room and gave a low whistle of approval. "You've really got an eye for quality, Meredith," he said genuinely. I smiled and thanked him. There were no grand speeches, no awkward glances, and no dramatic trip down memory lane. The boundary had been drawn, and every single person at that table knew exactly where it stood. Chloe's name didn't come up once. She had officially become a footnote. After the guests had filed out and Julian had said goodbye, with a warm, honest smile, I began clearing away the empty glasses. The light clinking sound didn't bother me anymore. Now it was just the sound of a home that belonged completely to me, filled with people who respected my presence. I slid the balcony door shut, turned off the living room lights, and went to bed. I had my life back, and that quiet sense of freedom and self-determination was worth more than any trophy house in the world. I had finally laid my armor down because I no longer needed it. At Quiet Revenge, we share stories about family betrayal, resilience, loss, and the quiet strength that helps people move forward. While AI tools may assist with parts of our creative process, every story is carefully selected, reviewed, edited, and produced by our team with great care and respect for our audience. Because our channel's monetization is currently limited, viewer support helps us continue creating these stories and maintaining the quality you expect. If our videos have ever kept you company, offered comfort, or given you something meaningful to reflect on, please consider supporting Quiet Revenge with the cost of a small cup of coffee. Patreon, https://www.patreon.com/Quiet Family Co-Fi, https://ko-fi.com/the story. Family, PayPal, https://www.paypal.com/PayPalMe/Kanhuangmin. Thank you for being part of this community.